I'm grateful you're watching and listening to this message. I hope that through what you hear, you really grow to understand what God says and how much He has shown His love for you in Jesus. As God's Word is open, I pray that He speaks to you. And listen, if it would be helpful for you to talk to someone, please reach out. We'd love to have a conversation with you. Again, thank you for watching.
If you have your Bibles, could you take them and turn to Ecclesiastes 3? Ecclesiastes 3. As you're turning, I want to tell you about a neighbor I had once named Charlie. I can say lots of things about Charlie. One thing I will say is Charlie always knew what time it was. Charlie always knew what time it was. And I don't mean kind of your watch or clock kind of time. I mean the seasons kind of time. So when do you plant stuff? I always knew who to ask. Charlie always knew exactly when you plant stuff. When do you do routine maintenance? When do you sharpen the lawnmower blade? When do you run the lawnmower out of gas? Where we lived, when do you run, get the snowblower ready? When do you do that when do you change the all of that? Charlie knew how to do that. As a matter of fact, Charlie also knew exactly when to, fertilize the yard. So he, at the end of our time as neighbors, he would just send me a picture, like very little text, other than just, here's the picture, go buy this and apply it within the next week. It's like, okay. And, spring, fall, I'd always just get these pictures. It's that time again, Curtis. You know what to do. So Charlie was a man of few words sometimes. Other times he had more words. But Charlie understood seasons. I love this quote. I don't even know that it's a Christian who said this. But Fernando Savitar said this: we cannot talk about our lives, ourselves, what we desire or fear, or what surrounds us without reference to time. Without reference to time. So lots of you in this room I know fairly well. Some of you I know really well. Some of you I may not know at all. We might not yet have met. And I hope that changes at the end of our service. But I'm guessing, I think it's a very, very educated guess, that you talk about time all the time. You talk about time all the time. You say things like, where did the time go? Or there's just not enough hours in the day. Or, man, I wasted all that time. I wasted all those years. Or, I wonder when my time will come. Or, I just need a little more time. Or, do you remember the time when or, I don't want this time to end. Or, I wish time could stand still. We're walking through some teaching in the book of Ecclesiastes. I'm not sure there's a place in the Bible that talks about time more or better than Ecclesiastes 3. So I want to read it for us. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, I'm going to read the first 8 verses. Writer of Ecclesiastes says this: there is an occasion for everything. Some of your translations will say season there. There is an occasion for everything, and a time for every activity under heaven. A time to give birth, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to uproot. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to tear down, and a time to build. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to throw stones, and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace, and a time to avoid embracing. A time to search, and a time to count as lost. A time to keep, and a time to throw away. A time to tear, and a time to sow. A time to be silent, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. 28 different times, 28 different seasons, 28 different occasions, we're being told again and again and again and again in these verses that we need to learn how to look at seasons. We need to learn how to look at times. I said last week that Ecclesiastes, if it does anything for us, it will help us name some things, kind of get categories for things, get our head around things. It does that here. What category do these things fall under? One thing you have to recognize as you read all those different times, you're not reading like moral prescriptions, commandments. So this is not saying on Tuesday, you need to block off some time to hate someone or something. Do that on Tuesday and Saturday. It's not saying that. What it actually is highlighting is you're reading how the world works. There are these different seasons. Some seasons are like they catch you totally off guard. Some seasons you see coming. Some get really, really intense. Some of it just seems kind of blah. Some seasons are really, really good. Some seasons are really, really tough. Some seasons just are. It's hard to know which to categorize them. Most seasons, as you read about these, I wonder if you picked up, a lot of these seasons are related to relationships, people. So God created us with all these times, but the times so quickly, like, well, we talk about a time to be born, a time to die. Those are people, they're relationships that matter to us. A time to dance, a time to embrace, that's people, that's relationships. A time not to touch, a time to laugh, a time to cry. Part of being human, part of living in times, looking at the seasons is really the relationships with people. I also wonder if you noticed how often the seasons are intermixed. It's like all these 28 and you may have 6 going at the same time, and they're all together in that. They're not really separated. They just all seem to go together. They seem to be pretty mixed. Maybe you've noticed this. I've had weeks in my life where someone very close to me had a baby was born, and then the very same week, I'm at a funeral home or going to a cemetery or officiating a memorial service. I've had weeks where someone's gotten a promotion. The very same week, someone's lost their job. So these things are intermixed. Something comes together in your life, and at the very same time, this is coming together, this is falling apart. It's mixed. You're planting, at one level, you're planting new roots, maybe, resettling. And also, at the very same time, you're like uprooting some other things in your life. All these seasons. Seasons are often, they're often chosen, but they're also often just given to us. We don't get a choice in it. It's not like we get to mark our calendar and go right here. Oh, I am saying there are choices you make for seasons. There's seasons where you decide, okay, enough time. Like we gotta clean out the garage. We gotta clean out the closet. You make that choice. There's also seasons where you gotta clean out your office, and it's not your choice. You have to clean out an attic of a loved one or an entire home, and you would rather not have to do that. There are seasons you choose. There are seasons like where you decide, let's remodel something, and everybody's favorite day is demo day. Just tear stuff up, and that's fun. But then there's also choices you don't make, like when your body needs chemo, and your body's going to get torn down. Some experimental treatment, and your immune system's going to be severely compromised. Would not be your choice, but you didn't really get a choice in it. Life is hard, and we feel these seasons. So what you don't read, there's a time to totally disconnect and pretend it's just all nothingness. It doesn't say that. It's like, no, the times, here's how you look at the seasons. You go through times, and you're going to feel them. And it's hard, and you have to hang in there. So what time is it for you? What seasons are you experiencing right now? Or sometimes you get those gifts that you're like, man, I wanted this season and it's finally here. Or I expected this season and it finally arrived. I feel like with those seasons, I generally want to bottle them all up I don't want them to go anywhere. I want to hang on to them. I want to remember them really well. Are those seasons, those wanted seasons, provoking gratitude? So one of my favorite songs is by the country music theologian Alan Jackson. So one of my favorite songs is, he sings, it's called Drive. Some of you know this. He talks first verse is about his dad teaching him to drive a boat. Second verse is his dad teaching him to drive a car. And I hear it and transported when I'm a teenager, and my dad, taught me to drive. But then the last verse, he says this: I'm grown up now, 3 daughters of my own, and I let them drive my old Jeep across the pasture at our home. And maybe one day they'll reach back in their file and pull out that old memory and think of me and smile. And I think of those. There's so many good seasons. And you would love more than anything to recreate it. You can't. You just receive it. It's God's gift to you. And you're you because of it. These are seasons. How are you dealing with the wanted ones? But I also have to ask, how are you dealing with the unexpected, the unwanted ones? I'm guessing most of those, at the very least, make us sigh. Just kind of take a deep breath. I wonder if those unwanted, unexpected seasons, could it help you to look to Jesus? And I know that feels cliche in church. The Bible and Jesus are the answer to every question, it seems like. But it's not so cliche. When God himself, God the Son, comes in flesh, you know what he does there? The one who lives in eternity submits his life to times and seasons. I wonder if you know and can appreciate that we don't have a high priest, Jesus Christ, who's unsympathetic to what it looks like to live in times and seasons. You read in the Bible, and some of the most you read about Jesus, there are chapters about his birth. There are many chapters about his death. I wonder if it'd help you to read the Gospels and realize, he had seasons of great joy. And you can almost hear him laughing. And then he had seasons of great pain. He had seasons of great acceptance. Everybody loved him. And then seasons of great rejection. Jesus lived in seasons. God the Son. I wonder if it would help you to appreciate, too, in all the seasons you're experiencing. If you're a Christian, you do know you have the Holy Spirit in you, which means every season, the time for this, the time for that, the time for this, the time for that, every one of those seasons, God is in you, walking with you. You don't walk any of those seasons alone. God doesn't go hands off. Far from that. It's God in you. Ecclesiastes helps us name things. It names what life under the sun looks like. This is what those seasons are. But I also said last week that Ecclesiastes will help us recognize how much we need some things. It's not just enough to name it. We need to recognize what we need. I find these verses 2 to 8 of Ecclesiastes 3 very, very beautiful. It's poetry, Hebrew poetry, at its finest. And then it's almost like there's a cold water. The cold water brigade comes in verse 9 and just pours it on all this sweetness that we had. If you read verse 9, can you look at it? This is what follows all that: time for this, time for that, time for this, time for that. Then it's like, but what do we have to show for it? What does the worker gain from his struggles? I have seen the task that God has given the children of Adam to keep them occupied. It's the prophet question. It comes up again and again in Ecclesiastes, all the seasons, all the times. And what do you have to show for it? Can you hang on to it? You really can't. I think a good illustration of this for me is sometimes, occasionally there's a screensaver that will pop up on my computer or sometimes even on my phone. And I'm sure there's a reason why, but there's a memory from the past. And it's like, here's all the memories from this year or from this particular person or this particular thing, and they're popping up. And you look at them and you go, man, that doesn't feel like that long ago. But in some ways, it's like I blinked and here we are. My kids look so much younger. I've aged so much, but of course, Shauna hasn't aged at all. And I look at it and go, God's kept me occupied as this verse says, and time has moved on. And there's even I don't know, it feels like even a metaphor there, because just as soon as you look at the picture, it's gone. Like the 10 seconds and there's another picture. And then 10 and then there's another one. And you're not really holding on to any of that. It's beautiful to name the times, but I will say there's more going on than just naming the times in Ecclesiastes 3. If you drive from Cleveland to Chattanooga on I-75, there are these times, there's a time when you crest the hill. It's like you get a view of all these mountains and ridges and hills that surround Chattanooga. And I love that view every single time. Ecclesiastes 3:11 is like that for me when it comes to time. It's like it situates, here's the hills and the ridges and the mountains. This is Ecclesiastes 3:11. He has made everything appropriate. Some of your translations will say beautiful. We'll talk about that. He has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also put eternity in their hearts. But no one can discover the work God has done from beginning to end. So we don't just learn to look at the seasons, but I also want, by these verses, we're also meant to learn how to look beyond the seasons. Not just look at the times, but there's something more going on. What God is doing is even greater than the individual seasons. And Ecclesiastes is telling us we need to look beyond those seasons. Sometimes it's helpful to have some handles there's some major biblical truth, and sometimes it's like a coat hanger. It's nice to be able to hang it on that. And so I want to give you some words that help you appreciate what's being taught here. So verse 11, you have God has made everything appropriate in his time. What if we hung that on the word arrangement? What do I mean? Looking beyond the seasons, when it comes to arrangement, there's one who is over time. This is saying there's one who gives time to us, gives seasons to us. But it says more than that. He arranges them. He makes them beautiful. He makes them, in this translation, appropriate. That word appropriate is fitting or beautiful. If you were to look up the opposite of what that is, it would mean something like uncoordinated, ugly, poor timing. So the opposite of that is what God's doing. It's situated perfectly. Here's what's true. There is one who knows how to put it all together. Every bit of the times I just mentioned, the 6, 7, 8, 10 seasons you're going through right now, there's one who knows how to put all of that together. The planting, the silence, the searching, the mourning, the building, the tearing, the embracing, all of it. Neatly, perfectly arranged. So you do not live in a world. You do not live in a world where there's no rhyme and no reason. You do not live in a world where there's just no bigger picture and it's all just painful and empty. Relating to seasons, here's what's tough is okay, we have all these seasons happen to us, and sometimes it feels like I'm looking, which I'm not a computer nerd, sometimes it's like our seasons in our life are looking at computer code. And if you looked at, pick your favorite app, pick your favorite web page, and if you were to look at all the coding that went in to make that happen, you could look and there's letters and numbers and symbols, and it would all seem like a jumbled mess. And then you open the app and it's amazing. And then it gets better and better because there's better and better coding. If you go the technical route, you could go, if you think of, have you ever seen embroidery? You see this beautiful hand-stitched embroidery. Have you ever turned it over to the other side? What's on the other side often is like a mess. Sometimes you actually can make out I think that's a flower. I think this is the color. From the other side, though, it feels like unnecessary and messy, and it's going this place and this place, and then you flip it around, and it's all arranged. It's like, what What a difference the perspective makes. This is telling us God situates things beautifully. God fits things into a beautiful picture. It's seen with Jesus. I love what it says in Galatians. When the time was full, when the time came to completion, God sent his son for the adoption of sons and daughters to bring us into the family at just the right time. He arranged it just perfectly. I think of Jesus directing the disciples, he would say, when this happens, then this will happen, then this will happen. I don't know that there's a better picture of how God arranges things. When Jesus is hanging on the cross, and one of the last things he says on the cross is a time reference. It is finished. It's accomplished. It's done. It's all been arranged. The mess of the trial, which was so unjust, the mess of the persecution, the mess of the disciples betraying and abandoning, all of that, it's now reached its full conclusion. It's all arranged. It's finished. Can I ask you, how are you doing with God being over how it all is arranged? Are you struggling there? Are you growing in your trust level? He's arranging it. Another way, sticking in verse 11 there, another way it's described to look beyond the seasons, right? Not just looking at times and seasons, but looking beyond that. Another thing he says in verse 11 is he has put eternity in our hearts. Eternity in our hearts. Another word maybe that would be helpful for us to kind of hang this on is more. Our Creator has hardwired us for more than just times and seasons. We are wired for that, but we're hardwired for more than that. Humans know this. Humans know right and wrong. Why? Because of our Creator. We're without excuse. Romans 1 tells us that. Humans have a God consciousness. Humans have a moral consciousness. We get that. And humans, this verse tells us, we have an eternity consciousness. We know there's something more. We know there's something that outlives us. In Scripture, it's not said that God did this with any other part of his creation. Plant kingdom, animal kingdom. But with you, he put eternity in your heart so that you would know there's more. Something in us that comes to terms with there's got to be something bigger. We want more, we want to know more, and that's not just because we're greedy. It's because we're humans and God made us with eternity in our hearts. And we feel the ache of that because we have our seasons, and here's the deal. The seasons, they come to an end. There's like, man, that was great, but that's done. But it leaves us going like, isn't there something more with all these good seasons that I've had? All the better times that I had? And this is telling us, it's pointing us. There's so many writers that have gotten at this concept. One of those would be Augustine, who is an African scholar, African pastor. He says this is like millennia ago, you have made us for yourself. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are just restless until they rest in you. Or this is the way Blaise Pascal says it. What else is this craving, this helplessness? What does this proclaim but that there was once in man a true happiness, of which all that now remains is the empty print and trace? This he tries in vain to fill with everything around him, seeking in things that are not there, the help he cannot find in those that are. Though none can help, since this infinite abyss can be filled only with an infinite and immutable object, in other words, by God himself. This is what some people take as like the God-shaped hole in our hearts. Some of you are familiar with this by C.S. Lewis. In Mere Christianity, he says this: most people, if they had really learned to look into their own hearts, would know that they do want and want acutely something that cannot be had in this world. There are all sorts of things in this world that offer to give it to you, but they never quite keep their promise. So if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. You just keep coming back to it. I mean, just different ways of saying it. It's more in your heart. Eternity consciousness. And that's meant to draw us to a relationship. Often we talk about I want people to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I think it'd be more accurate to say you do have a relationship with Jesus Christ. But today, is it one where you're just neglecting and avoiding? Thinking you've got a better way of working out all of your life? That's a relationship with him. It's just one that says, I really don't need him. Or is it a relationship of devotion and submission and love? You were made for eternity. Jesus talked about full life and abundant life. He talked a lot about eternal life. He even said to his friend Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, he will live. And then he asked her, do you believe this? I think he's telling us there's something inside of you. How are you doing with that? I hope surely there's more than what you spend your time looking at. So, all the apps, or the hard work you do at your job, or school, or dating, homework, savings, retirement, promotions. Are you open to, there's got to be more than that. There's got to be more than these seasons. And you begin to ask God a different kind of question, what do you want from me? And maybe another question just as important, what do you want for me? You're made for more. Can we keep digging? Because actually in verse 11 there, it takes us another layer deeper into, we're learning to look beyond the seasons. It says at the end of verse 11, no one can discover the work God has done from beginning to end. Which tells us again, as we look beyond the seasons, we also recognize our limits. The tension comes because, according to that verse, we have limits and God does not. Knowing we cannot discover all that God is doing. So you and I have our seasons. We have our seasons of building and weeping and embracing and sowing. And here's what's tough, we can't figure it out. Even when we know it fits, even when we know it's made for more, there's still something in us that we don't have the complete perspective. We don't know how to set it all together, set it in with other times. I wonder if it's an awful lot like a parent watching their preschooler, their toddler, and you've got to care for this child, and so you go, it's nap time, and the child has no time for that. Why would that child ever need a nap? It's and the world knows this kid's going to be absolutely miserable if we don't get a nap right now. Or what about snack time? Why can't snack time be all the time? I think there are adults that may have that issue, but another sermon for another day. Your child, they don't understand that we're doing this, or the timing of leading up to the big vacation is going to blow their mind. They have no concept of that. And let's say here you are at 30 and they're 3, and there's that disparity, but you're both humans. How much would that disparity grow with the limits you have compared to our infinite God? It just puts some of this into perspective. On a grown-up scale, Jesus ran into this all the time. He would tell his disciples, even those closest to him, you're not reading the seasons right. You don't know what the times are. He would say, my hour it's not yet come. It's not the right time. Even when he's told about his friend Lazarus who is dying, he waits, and what do they tell him? What do the sisters of Lazarus say? You came too late. They had no idea the timetable. I wonder how you're doing with that. Jesus is always doing great work. We don't always know the timetable. How are we handling this? When we grow in this area, we grow by, it's not here's spiritual growth. We just have better predictive models and we just can figure it all out, what God's doing. That's not really the way this is going to work. I may not know what God's going to do at 1:10 p.m. today. And there's just no way to predict those things. But am I resting in him who has no limits, even as I face seasons and times with limits? Can we keep reading? Look at verse 14, because there's another layer to this. Another way to look beyond the seasons, I know that everything God does will last forever. And there's no adding to it or taking from it. God works so that people will be in awe of him. We're learning to look beyond the seasons, at the seasons, yes, but beyond the seasons, and then we recognize something about permanence. What God does lasts forever. We're in the middle of laughing and mourning and searching and being torn apart. It's easy to wonder if there are any fixed points. So the surveyor has to have fixed points, and it's like, well, we know this is accurate, and then we build a whole model around this. Or a math formula, we know this is accurate, and then we can plug in variables around that. But sometimes our times and our seasons make us go, is there any fixed point, any reference point? And this is helping us. For all the seasons of ours that change, and then change again, and then change back, for all those things that we can't get to stick, God doesn't have that problem. God doesn't have to deal in temporary. God deals in permanent. If you take your faith too casually, this may actually be a little bit of a jolt. God doing permanent things. But it could be the best news you've heard all day. I want you to think about the permanence. What does it mean that those united to Jesus are held close to him permanently? What does it mean that when you rely on him totally, when you throw yourself on his mercy for your sin, when you identify with him as your everything, he will never cast you out. No one will ever be able to take you out of his hand. This is what he does. He cannot be unfaithful. Fixed point. His permanence. My seasons change. Fixed point. What he does lasts forever. Fixed point. Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil, to put an end to sin, to put an end to death, to put an end to the grave. Those things aren't going to make a comeback. He deals with them. Another fixed point. The gates of hell will not prove to be too much for his people. And we anchor our seasons in our life where we're going up and down and around. We've got a fixed reference point. What he does lasts forever. Jesus comes to make all things new permanently. Creation is reconciled and restored. He will get this job done. And it will be done permanently. I like to think of these as God's forever promises. How are you doing with those? Are they making your steps a little more stable? I'm not sure it can change all the times and seasons. Again, a lot of those are beyond your choice. But those fixed points, those reference points, your seasons aren't permanent, but God operates on a different plane. Crazy stuff happens, and God's steady. We overhear one more conversation. It's actually the writer talking to himself. I always feel better in the Bible when I read of people talking to themselves, because I do it. And Ecclesiastes, the writer of Ecclesiastes said, look at verse 17. How's he processing time and seasons? I said to myself, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, since there is a time for every activity and every work. Ecclesiastes brings you back to accountability about judgment. So there's wrong interpretations of like, well, if there's just all these times and seasons and they're all repetitive, then what does it matter? Just do whatever you want. It's like Ecclesiastes will never let you just kind of run free in that territory as if God, there's no judgment, no accountability. No, actually what it says is your seasons and how you handle them and what you do in them, you'll give an account, I will give an account for. But then also that accountability, also we have to recognize, we could draw another faulty conclusion, and that's like, oh, we got to walk on eggshells. And Ecclesiastes doesn't go there, of like we should be paralyzed by fear. It does not say that. What it says is like we're going to wake up tomorrow, if God gives us another day, and we're going to walk, and we're going to give an account for those seasons. Seasons we choose, the seasons we didn't. There's an accountability to that. So much more we could say. My life and your life is going to come in seasons and times. I love what Psalm 90 says. It praises prayer. Teach us, Lord, to number our days. And also in that psalm, it's asking the Lord, like when the sun comes up, satisfy us with your love. Help us appreciate the times and the seasons. And as we start a new day, help us be satisfied with that love. Receive your gifts. Turn toward God. Take this gift, take this season, and let that season propel you to the Lord. So many ways that could be helpful to us as we look at the seasons. But again, we're reminded today to look beyond the seasons. We're put on notice. Prepare for something beyond these seasons. Prepare for accountability. The things forgotten, minimized, and covered will one day be exposed. Accept the permanence. Even as you can't hold on to things, God is permanent. Live within the limits, even as you say, man, these seasons make me long for something fuller and greater. Follow the more of eternity that your heart knows is there. And let God do beautiful work in just the right time. I want to ask our worship team to come up. I'm going to close our service a little bit differently. I want us actually to read a verse together. That's going to be the first verse of this chapter. Ecclesiastes 3, verse 1. We've looked at how we're supposed to look at seasons. We've zoomed out to see how should we look beyond the seasons. Let's remind ourselves of this truth. Can we read it together? There is an occasion for everything and a time for every activity under heaven.